A pleasant good afternoon to my fellow classmates and also to our instructor, Mr. Vincent Bahandi. Good afternoon, sir. For the recap, last meeting we discussed about the difficulty in remembering and focusing. So this time, I and my groupmates will discuss what is marginalization in education. By the way, I'm Kabanag Jesslyn Amarganda. So in this section, you will understand what marginalization means, specifically in area of education. You will learn about the different groups that are marginalized in society and in education. So, what is marginalization? Marginalization is treatment of a person, group, or concept as significant or peripheral. And what is education? So, education is the process of receiving or giving systematic instruction, especially at a school or university. Marginalization, also referred to as social exclusions, occurs when certain groups of people get denied access to areas of society. For example, assuming someone will act a certain way based on stereotypes about the identity, such as race, gender, sexuality, and etc. Also, marginalizations can include people of color, women, LGBTQ+, low-income individuals, prisoners, disabilities, senior citizens. In education also, for example, is low learners, poor students, disability students, and etc. In general terms, marginalized communities are communities confined to the lower or peripheral edge of the society, such as group is denied involvement in mainstream economic, political, cultural, and social activities due to their living conditions, lifestyles, or exclusions. So Misa will explore how marginalization is experienced by primary school students. He proposed that marginalizations can be conceptualized in four general ways. First is the child experiences some kind of marginalization that is recognized by almost everybody, including himself or herself. Second, the child feels that he or she is experiencing marginalization, whereas most of the others do not recognize this. Third, when a child found in what appears to be marginalized situation but does not feel it or does not view it as marginalization. Lastly, when a child experiencing marginalization but does not admit it. So, MISA 2012 suggests that this perspective of the student can provide a way of examining process, systems, and occurrences in the school and may assist in the awareness of and respond to marginalization. It is important for adults in education to be conscious of this issue and put a stop to it. So, we have the marginalization and inclusion. So, when we say inclusion, the actions or state of including or of being included within a group or structure. So, MISA 2012 manifests how young people voice can intensity systems, processes, and experience in congruence with inclusive education. Voice is clearly identified as one of the student rights. It means having a say as well as referring to language and emotions components as well as nonverbal means that are used to express opinions.
The framework demonstrates a four-step cyclical process that is quite flexible. When we say framework, it is a real or conceptual instructor intended to serve as a support or guide for the building of something that expands the structure into something useful. So in teaching children, framework is to build the student's mind and their ability, and demonstrate is to prove something and cyclical something, and by using these four steps process, the students can keep to being them what to learn and have a broad understanding. They are flexible to learn new things. In this first step, various techniques are used that allow wide voices and issues that might lead to marginalizations of students and the schools to emerge. Technique that are used include scenarios, visual, image, drawing, role-play, sociometric measures, and etc. So, marginalization in learning is an unfair, favored, or biased distribution of access to learning facilities, and resources. So, in step 1, you need to listen to the issues or concerns to the students to take actions on what is right to do. This is some techniques that you need to do so that it can apply this to their life and get lesson. Example, when the child is have a problem to communicate, it can boost their confidence and improve their communication skills so that you can teach students unbiased. Situating the students in the center of the process, various methods are used to allow them to express how various concerns and experiences led to the marginalizations of the students in schools. It is needed that your student is in the center of the process. You need to put your students in the situation that they can learn and express their feelings and that they are not important. You as a teacher, you need to put their level of confidence the higher for them to stop their trauma that is good for them. By that, they can enjoy and learn equally without teaching biases. Step 2 of the framework involves looking closely at data gathered during the first step in order to generate information that can be used to stimulate further discussions. Ideas of how to make sense of the data gathered as well as how to analyze and interpret them are discussed. So in step 2, you as a teacher, you need to look closely to the data gathering to generate and discuss at will. So in this stage of the process, data gathered from step 1 is meticulously examined to identify students who may be experiencing some kind of marginalization or any concern that might lead to marginalization. It is during this time that there is an unpleasant focus on the concern about marginalization that were gathered from the previous steps. Only concern or issues are discussed and no names are mentioned. So in these steps, you need to focus on the concerns to the students about marginalizations. Just only the concern but don't mention the name. To avoid any bad situation happen, you as a teacher, you need to think what will happen next. Students are asked to think what their own experiences as well as about what their classmates feel and experience. So students need to open up on what their experience in life. As the students, you as a teacher, you need to hear their own experiences about marginalizations. Collaboration between the adults and the students in the phase is very significant. It spells out the response of the group and the concrete actions that will be taken to confront the issues and concern about marginalizations that were shared in the previous step. So in this step, you need to collaborate to the parents of the students to be more effective and overcome the issues. The process is not end in step 4. It goes on to make adults mindful of what the young people have to say. It also assured both the young people and the adults that marginalization is given due attention and concern are addressed. So still in process is not necessarily end in step 4. But as a future teacher, you need to be mindful on what the young people concerns. You need to be addressed and given attention to the issues and concern to be heard.
Once again, a pleasant day to each and everyone. My name is Isa Kaligid for the continuation of this topic, which is the Chapter 7, Learners in Other Marginalized Group, Part 3, Different Learners in Marginalized Groups. In the moment, let's quickly go back of what is marginalization mean. So when we say marginalization, it is the process in which something or someone is pushed to the edge of a group and assigned lesser importance. It is also an individual's feeling of being left out from meaningful participation in the society's processes and activities, even though he or she is a former member of the society. So let me introduce to you this picture. What have you observed? So What is in the picture depicts a thousand of words, a certain feeling that some of us could not speak about. How is it feels? Have you ever felt being left behind, discriminated, the feeling of being alone, and treated less important just because you're not among them? Have you ever tried that one? When will the society uses their heart to see the beauty of imperfection? With this, we can really realize that the world is not fair. But embracing the uniqueness of everyone make us all united, as it always starts within ourselves. So one of the common examples of those people who felt being marginalized, particularly in educational environment, are those people who belong to indigenous groups, people with disability, those who have traumatic past experiences, in which we'll be talking about later in our discussion. So here it is. These are the list or the example of marginalized people or group, not just only in educational environment, but also in other aspects of our society. First, we have child laborers or domestic workers. Second, indigenous people. Third, abused children. Fourth, refugees or displayed children. And of course, the fifth and the last one is children in conflict zone. Now, we first tackle about the the first one, which is the child laborers or domestic workers. So, the International Labor Organization or ILO describes child labor as work that deprives children of their childhood, their potential and their dignity, and that is harmful to physical and mental development. So usually this labor is caused by poverty, the lack of education, and the lack of schools. So we have also known that this child labor are the children at their young age choose to work due to poverty, meaning to say uh, they are often below 18. One of the saddest factors or reason to be pointed out why these children are forced to work at a very young age is mainly because, yes, as what I have said a while ago, it is because of poverty, lack of good schools, as well as growth of informal economy. Aside from that, it's a parent's responsibility to sustain for the family. They must be the one who will be portray this responsibility at the first place, not their children. This is one of the major reason why some children's lives are being compromised is because of the parents' lack of family planning. These issues is one of the country's major concern. In fact, today's the rate of teenage pregnancy and lack of family planning can be pointed out why our country is at verge, especially in dealing with poverty. Hence, many lives of our young men, especially the learners, are forced to work to sustain their family instead of going to school and learn a lot of things for the betterment of their future and the country in general. Moreover, child labor affects 152 million minors worldwide. See how sad to think how extremely large the population of young laborers. This is not just in our country, but throughout the world. Just try to imagine that millions of minors or children throughout the globe are working to sustain their family instead of going to school. As a result, they remain illiterate, which limits their ability to contribute to their own well-being as well as to the community they live. And half of the said millions, rather, are at rest in terms of their health, safety, and moral development. One of the key results noted in the report is child labor is frequently associated with educational marginalization. So, this report was the first to acknowledge the connection between education and child labor. It is clearly stated that due to poverty, this large number of child laborers are unable to get education. And according to ILO 2016, they also tend to perform below par compared to their classmates in terms of learning achievement. Why? It is because, firstly, their time to study were given to work. As a result, those children who are able to study are emotionally and physically tired from work. Next, in June 2015, the theme of World Day Against Child Labor was No to Child Labor, Yes to Quality Education. So the challenge here is to grant children with free mandatory means to enjoy the quality education covering those current in child labor. With this, more dynamic efforts are being made to ensure that the national policy on child labor are strong and consistent. This is to ensure that high quality child education is available as well as excellent teacher education. So what can you do as a person to stop child labor? We are still quite far from the Sustainable Development Goals 8.7 that aims to eradicate child labor by 2025. This means that there are still so much work to be done, policies to put in place, and cooperation among nations to put an end to this. You know, it's our small ways which can lead to better results and aid for the betterment of our future. We can actually advocate something to raise and development functions as well as the awareness to make everybody sees the beauty of diversity. As a future educator, we must be dedicated to serve for our Philippine country. It is because it is our sole duty to motivate and inspire our students and support their needs to make a different strategies and avenues to help students better in a way that they can learn easily. Aside from this, I believe that change will start in our own. We Filipino, no matter what professions, race, religion, or political views, let us collaborate our efforts upon building a strong foundation for the different ways and advocacies that aims to hinder the negative effects of child labors to our young learners. Moving on to the next part of this lesson, we have letter B, indigenous people. Letter B, indigenous people. Now, let's get in touch with the important lesson or aspect of this topic. So, when you hear the words indigenous people, what comes to your mind? So, usually you would probably think about tribe. Am I right? So, they are the descendants of the earliest known inhabitants of an area, especially one that has been colonized by a now dominant groups of settlers. However, the term has no strict definition and can be used to describe a variety of peoples and culture. So there are children who are part of indigenous group. They are distinct socially and culturally. There is no commonly acknowledged meaning of the term indigenous people. This is according to the study of Jose R. Martinez Cubo on the problem of discrimination against indigenous population presented. A working definition of indigenous communities, peoples, and nations. But based on what we have known, indigenous people are also differed from how they live. Thus, they cannot keep pace with modernization as they are usually located at the remote areas. In school, they are sometimes discriminated due to their uniqueness and sometimes they cannot adapt with the school culture. Now, if we will be noticed, there are only few indigenous children who choose to study and interact with the common students due to the differences and discrimination they have experienced. But later, I will presenting a real life scenario about this kind of people who managed to finish their studies despite of the challenges and discrimination they have experienced. In the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People 2007, Indigenous people are acknowledged to have suffered from historic justices as a result of their colonizations and disposition of their land territories and resources, thus preventing them from exercising, in particular, their right to development in accordance with their own needs and interests. So, indigenous people have suffered so much from the hands of humanity, and some of these committed human rights abuses are number one. First, marginalization. So, they are treated differently inside the society. Second, excessive poverty. So, they were subjected to discrimination and few opportunities for major economic activities, education, or political participation. Third is the absence or lack of quality education. So usually indigenous children are more likely to arrive at school, for example, hungry, ill, and tired. They are often bullied, and the use of corporal punishment in today's is still widespread. Ethics and cultural appropriation at school are major obstacle to equal access of education. They are also suffered poor health and unsanitary and poor living conditions, malnutrition due to poverty. And I think part of it is the nutrition ignorance. Next is unemployment and equal opportunities for employment, as they are often compared to the other people who have let's say normal lives, which is reflected by the body. And lastly, the expulsion from their land, maybe because of the lack of papers, or shall we say the titulo. According to Mr. Shah Sokang, Under Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, in his foreword for the SUWIP 2010, said that even their language, their value systems, cultures, traditions, and their way of life is being continuously vulnerable to threats of destruction. Focusing of education. Indigenous people generally lacks access to education because they usually stay in places that are quite far from schools, and also because of their marginalized status in the community. So in addition to this, the curriculum of the school they'll get into, if there is a school available for their children to go to, is not adapted to their culture and language. It is a big struggle to all indigenous people who are aiming for a quality education. Then teachers are not trained to teach indigenous people. They do not speak their language, and more often than that are unable to provide materials and activities that are relevant to the uniqueness of their culture. A consequence of this is an educational gap. You know what? This is very challenging, not just only for the indigenous people itself, but also to the teachers. There are, we can say, heroes of today who are truly love and serve the people of his country, that are willing to teach and willing to reach out this kind of people. And yes, it might be very challenging for them to teach, especially if they don't have any background of their lifestyles. Even with the shortage of materials, which may result to educational gap, meaning to say there's a differences when it comes to acquiring the learning, as well as the way they learn using the availability of the possible needs and materials to use. Another consequences is the destruction of their culture and the loss of their identity. This is brought about by an educational system that is foreign and that did not consider their future in the first place. So this is very sad, and we can say unethical system, which makes students with different backgrounds feel that they are not belong and welcome to the environment. But there are still courageous people who love and preserve their identities of where they came from. I have so Uh, this is one in some of the reality show from the MMK. Maybe some of you already know him. So there he is. He is Norman King. He was the first Aita to graduate from the University of the Philippines, Manila, with a degree of Bachelor of Arts in Behavioral Science in 2017. And what the most impactful or the interesting of him that he done during the graduation is that the moment when Norman King claimed his diploma wearing the traditional Aita, which is the bahag. And this made a history. Along with a degree in BE, behavioral science is a story filled with discrimination, poverty, and natural calamities. Norman King was born in 1988 at the foot of Mount Pinatubo. Only 3 years before the deadly eruption, he was the eldest of the 7 siblings and worked at the early age to help provide for the family. So just like as what we have discussed a while ago, which is Norman King is part also uh, as as you noticed in child labor, those who work at a very young age. But he is also part with the indigenous people. Norman's life was filled with the struggles of poverty, but his mother reminds him that he owes his growth to all the hardship he has faced. That a man who has fallen and risen is someone who commands respect and honor. Kings hopes to become an inspiration to his fellow Aitas and vows to become voice of other indigenous people. What an inspirational story. It is also good to note that a number of indigenous people who have gone through formal schooling, they have become progressive and helpful in uplifting the plight of their indigenous community. The status of indigenous women who have gone to formal schooling has also empowered them. As a matter of fact, education is a right and means of self-improvement. Its terminal goal is a better life for the individual and his or her family. Quality education will eventually equate to better lives for indigenous people. And the Declaration of Right of Indigenous People notes that equality education is significant for indigenous people and they have the right to manage their own system of education wherein they are free to use their own languages. It is also, let's say, the kind of a call of people in the world that we should respect them together with their beliefs, traditions, and cultures. Because like us, they are human beings. They also make a valuable contribution to the world's heritage thanks to their traditional knowledge and understanding of ecosystem management. We have a lot of talent which we can put together in preserving the world building. May it be that we will give them the same level of love, same with what we give to others. So that's the end of my part. As a conclusion, child laborers and indigenous people both experience discrimination, poverty, and for which has inadequate access and provisions to education. So to conclude, government can help marginalized group to reach in their profession to help them live better, and of course our personal care and actions can greatly contribute to build a strong foundation upon addressing their needs, especially with equal access to education. So that would be all. Thank you, and let's proceed to the next reporter.
Good morning, everyone. I am Carion Stephanie, and my report is the continuation of Ms. Khalid Aisa report. And the topics that I am going to discuss is all about the third, fourth, and fifth subtopics of different learners in a marginalized groups. First, I am going to discuss abused children. Next is refugees or displaced children, and last is children in conflict zones. So, abused children. What is abused children? Intentional harm or mistreatment to a child under 18 years old is considered child abuse. Child abuse takes many forms, which often occur at the same time. Physical abuse. Physical child abuse occurs when a child is purposely physically injured or put at risk of harm by another person. Sexual abuse. Child sexual abuse is any sexual activity with a child. This can involve sexual contact, such as intentional sexual touching, oral genital contact, or intercourse. This can also involve non-contact sexual abuse of a child, such as exposing a child to sexual activity or pornography, observing or filming a child in a sexual manner, sexual harassment of a child, or prostitution of a child, including sex trafficking. Next is emotional abuse. Emotional child abuse means injuring a child's self-esteem or emotional well-being. It includes verbal and emotional assault, such as continually belittling or berating a child, as well as isolating, ignoring, or rejecting a child. Medical abuse. Medical child abuse occurs when someone gives false information about illness in a child that requires medical attention, putting the child at risk of injury and unnecessary medical care. Neglect. Child neglect is failure to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, clean living conditions, affections, supervision, education, or dental or medical care. Now let's move on to refugees or displaced children. What is the meaning of refugee children? Refugees are persons who are outside their country of origin for reasons of feared persecution, conflict, generalized violence, or other circumstances that have seriously disturbed public order and, as a result, require international protection. Refugees are people who are seeking a safe haven after being forced to flee violence, persecution of war. Worldwide, there are nearly 25.9 million refugees, over half of whom are children. Refugee children are among the most vulnerable in the world. So what are the problems of refugee children? First is financial stressors, difficulties finding adequate housing, difficulties finding employment, loss of community support, lack of access to resources, transportation difficulties, and that's all. So what is the main reason people are displaced? Every year, millions of people are forced to leave their homes due to conflict, violence, human rights violations, persecution, disaster, and adverse effects of climate change. Child displacement is the complete removal or separation of children from their parents and immediate family or setting in which they have initially been reared. A displaced child may also be unable to pursue their former work, leading to unemployment, underemployment, or informal work, and a significant drop in income. Livelihood loss may lead to reduced access to food and an increase in malnutrition. Displaced persons are often forced to place their lives at risk, travel in inhuman conditions, and may be exposed to exploitation and abuse. So last is children in conflict zones. So Eglantian Jeb, drafter of the Declaration on the Rights of the Child and funder of the Save the Children, said, all wars, just or unjust, are waged against children. In December 2018, Manuel Fontaine, UNICEF Director for Emergency Programs, said children living in conflict zones around the world have continued to suffer through extreme levels of violence over the past 12 months. And the world has continued to follow them. For too long, parties to conflict has been committing atrocities with near total impunity, and it is only getting worse. Much more can and must be done to protect and assist children. It is said that children in countries that are at war are being used as human shields, killed, maimed, or recruited to fight. Rape, forced marriage, the children have rights accorded to them by law, by the Convention on Child's Rights, but it is utter disrespect and disregard for this right that is brought about by the unresponsive of governments, and even at times connivance with the perpetrators that is causing the children harm. It is also sad to note that other countries are not helpful in solving this problem. Save the Children Report 2019. Despite the loss, the number of children caught in the conflict zones is still increasing, and many are being deliberately targeted. The way wars are being fought in this present day demonstrate a total disregard for children and schools. Children are constantly getting killed and or hurt, lost their parents, family have very poor health and mental states, are under toxic stress. This causes both physical and psychological trauma that will have enduring effects. When they are raped, they are condemned, and if they get pregnant, the unborn children are unwanted and stigmatized. Being a child soldier makes them lose their identity and exposes them to conditions that will have a long-lasting effect on their mental health. There are countless effects of armed conflict on children who are very vulnerable and unable to protect themselves. The effect on the children's education enrollment is going down. A lot of children are dropping out of school. School conditions are bad. There are low levels of educational attainment, and abuse is committed. So that would be all about my report. Thank you.